Arrival at Nexus Station. The cold gleam of Nexus Station loomed like a metal giant against the vast blackness of space. Streams of neon light and a diverse mix of voices echoed through its metal corridors, a place known for its chaotic energy and the strange mix of creatures that called it home, even if just temporarily. Matt Reeves, a human bounty hunter, stepped off his ship, his boots meeting the station floor with a firm sense of purpose. His usual leather jacket was worn but durable, the dark material clinging to him like a second skin, his hand resting naturally on the handle of his laser pistol. Nexus Station wasn't just a stop for him. It was the end of a long, grueling journey in pursuit of one of the galaxy's most notorious criminals, a figure known only as Zorg. The first thing that struck Matt as he entered the main docking area was the overwhelming diversity. Alien species of all kinds were bustling around, trading goods, making deals, and sharing tales of distant galaxies. Tentacled creatures haggled over the price of unfamiliar gadgets with reptilian traders, and ethereal beings glided by, their transparent skin pulsing with a soft, rhythmic glow. This was the heart of galactic trade, a melting pot of cultures and agendas, and Nexus Station was its wild core. Matt's comlink buzzed abruptly, snapping him from his daze. He ducked into a shadowy corner to answer. Reeves reporting, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the station. A voice crackled through the device. Target is Zorg. Lower levels. Watch yourself, he's well connected. Matt's eyes narrowed. Roger that. I'll find him. He slipped back into the flow of the crowd, scanning the faces and creatures around him. Every step took him deeper into the maze of Nexus, where neon lights flickered and shadows twisted. He finally arrived at a dingy bar tucked away in the station's underbelly, the kind of place where secrets were bartered over drinks. The sign above the door read, "The Edge of the Universe." Inside, the scent of alien herbs and strong alcohol filled the air. As Matt's eyes adjusted to the dim light, they landed on the bartender. She was striking, with deep blue skin that shimmered in the low light. Her features were alien but hauntingly beautiful, with large, expressive eyes that held a glint of both mystery and sadness. This was a face he wouldn't forget. With a confident stride, Matt approached the bar. "Strongest thing you've got," he said, flashing a hint of a smile. The woman raised an eyebrow, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she nodded. "You look like the type who can handle it. Name's Jaya, by the way." "Matt," he replied, feeling the unusual tug of curiosity. He rarely gave out his real name, but something about this encounter felt different. As Jaya turned to mix his drink, Matt took in the details of her movements, the fluid grace, the practiced ease. She slid a glass filled with a glowing blue liquid towards him, and he caught a faint smirk on her lips. "So, Matt," she said, her voice melodic, "what brings a human bounty hunter all the way out to the edges of the galaxy?" Matt chuckled. "Is it that obvious?" Jaya shrugged, her smile widening. "The gun, the jacket, the look. It's not hard to tell. And we don't get many humans out here unless they're chasing something, or someone." He raised the glass to her in a silent toast. "Fair enough. Ever hear of a guy named Zorg?" Jaya's hand stilled, just for a moment, before she resumed her usual ease. "Can't say I have," she replied smoothly. "But maybe you're asking the wrong question." Matt arched an eyebrow, intrigue. "And what's the right question?" She leaned closer, her eyes locking with his. "Why is a human bounty hunter asking about Zorg in a place like this?" A ripple of silence passed between them, the hum of the bar fading into the background. Matt took a slow sip, savoring the way the drink burned, leaving a lingering sweetness. He was used to keeping things close to his chest, but there was something disarming about Jaya. Maybe it was the way her sad eyes held his gaze or the slight tease in her smile. "You seem like you've been around, Jaya," he said, setting down his glass. "What's someone like you doing on Nexus?" For the first time, her expression faltered, a shadow crossing her face. "Let's just say I needed a fresh start. This place is good for people who want to disappear." He nodded, recognizing a fellow drifter in her. I get that. Over the next few days, Matt found himself returning to the edge of the universe, ostensibly to gather intel on Zorg, but in reality, he was increasingly drawn to Jaya. They shared fragments of their lives, carefully curated truths, and occasional laughter that felt strangely out of place in such a lawless station. Each night, as their conversations deepened, Matt felt a growing connection with her that defied logic and his usual instincts. But on the seventh night, things changed. Matt entered the bar clutching his side, blood seeping through his jacket. He'd barely escaped an ambush. One of Zorg's informants had turned against him, leading him into a trap. Pain radiated through his torso as he stumbled inside. Jaya's eyes widened when she saw him. Without a word, she jumped over the bar, slipping her arm around him to support his weight. Come on, tough guy, she murmured, guiding him to a back door. She led him up a narrow staircase to a small, sparsely furnished room. The space was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos below. As she tended to his wound with careful hands, Matt found himself studying her face, each shadow and curve etched with empathy and resolve. You're staring, she said softly, not looking up from her work. Can you blame me? He replied, his voice thick with both pain and something else. In the gentle light of her room, her skin looked almost ethereal, her eyes more captivating than ever. Her gaze met his, and the air between them was charged with an unspoken tension. Matt, she whispered, I should warn you, my people, we don't do casual. A flicker of surprise passed through him, but he smiled, feeling something shift inside him. Good, he replied, neither do I. Outside, the neon lights of Nexus Station continued their relentless glow, but here, in this small room, they shared a brief moment of peace, a calm in the storm, a connection that neither of them had anticipated. The secrets we keep. The soft hum of the station was barely audible in Jaya's small apartment, a reprieve from the noise below. The quiet allowed Matt to focus on the woman tending to his wound, her touch both gentle and precise. She moved with a kind of care that suggested she'd done this before, though why a bartender would know so much about treating wounds was a question he filed away for later. As Jaya finished dressing his wound, she looked at him, her expression unreadable. I don't know what you're mixed up in, Matt, but Zorg isn't the kind of enemy you make lightly. Matt let out a low laugh, wincing at the pain it caused. Let's just say he's a slippery one, but I've handled worse. Jaya didn't return his smile. Instead, she sighed, her gaze drifting to the small window that framed the stars beyond the station. People like Zorg, they don't just disappear when you catch them. They have a way of lingering, leaving scars. Matt watched her, sensing a story behind her words. You know, for someone who just serves drinks, you seem to know a lot about the kind of people I deal with. She looked at him, a flicker of something sad and distant in her eyes. This place attracts a lot of broken people, Matt. You spend enough time here, you learn how to recognize them. A silence fell between them, thick with the weight of unsaid things. He wanted to ask her more, to understand what had brought her to Nexus, but the vulnerability in her eyes held him back. Instead, he broke the silence with a question that had been bothering him since they first met. Jaya, why are you helping me? She paused, her gaze fixed on him. Because, Matt, you remind me of someone I used to know. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, as if the memory was something precious she was afraid to break. Someone who thought they could outrun their past. Matt didn't press her. He knew better than to pry into someone else's wounds. They both had their scars. Some things were better left unsaid. Just then, his comlink buzzed with an urgent message, shattering the quiet. He grimaced, not wanting to interrupt the moment, but Jaya gave him a small nod, urging him to answer. He activated the device, keeping his voice low. Ree's here. The voice on the other end was tense. Matt, we've got a lead. Zorg's meeting someone in the old maintenance tunnels, bottom levels of the station. We don't know who yet, but if you're going to make a move, now's the time. Matt's hand tightened around the comlink, his mind racing. This was the break he'd been waiting for. If he could intercept Zorg, he might finally end this months-long chase. But the thought of leaving Jaya, especially after this night, filled him with an unexpected hesitation. "I'll be there," he said into the comlink, his voice steady. Ending the call, he turned to Jaya, his eyes meeting hers. "Looks like I've got to go." She nodded, a flicker of worry crossing her face. "Be careful, Matt. The lower levels, they're not just dangerous. They're unpredictable. People go down there and don't come back." Matt gave her a reassuring smile, trying to ease the tension. "I'll be fine. This isn't my first dance." But as he made his way to the door, he felt her hand on his arm. When he looked back, Jaya's gaze was intense, her voice barely a whisper. "Matt, if you make it out, come back here. Don't disappear on me." For a moment, he was at a loss for words. He wasn't used to people caring whether he came back, but there was a warmth in Jaya's eyes that made him want to promise her that he would. "I'll be back," he said softly, more to himself than to her. The journey to the lower levels of Nexus was like descending into another world. The pristine, neon-lit upper corridors gave way to dim, labyrinthine tunnels, filled with the scent of rust and stale air. This part of the station was all but forgotten, a hidden world where the station's unwanted and unremembered lurked in the shadows. As he ventured deeper, Matt's senses sharpened. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. He kept his hand on his pistol, his movements quiet and calculated. The maintenance tunnels were a known meeting place for black market deals and under-the-radar exchanges, and he had no doubt that Zorg would have guards posted. Finally, he reached the designated spot, a wide-open chamber dimly lit by a single flickering light. Crates were scattered around, and in the center of the room stood Zorg, flanked by two burly figures. Matt could feel the adrenaline building in his veins as he stepped out from the shadows, his pistol raised. "Zorg," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty chamber. The arms dealer turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Matt. Well, the bounty hunter returns. I was starting to think you'd lost interest." Matt smirked, his aim steady. "Funny, I was hoping I wouldn't have to see your ugly face again." Zorg's expression twisted into a sneer. Bold words from a man who's outnumbered. But Matt was ready. He'd studied Zorg's tactics long enough to know he always kept two guards close and that he liked to keep his back to an escape route. With a swift motion, Matt fired at the guards, taking them by surprise. One fell immediately, while the other stumbled, clutching his shoulder. Zorg, realizing the tide had turned, made a run for the exit, but Matt was faster. He lunged forward, tackling Zorg to the ground, his gun pressed to the alien's chest. "It's over," Matt hissed, his voice filled with both triumph and exhaustion. Zorg looked up at him, a hint of fear in his eyes. "You think you can just end this, Reeves? There's a reason I have so many allies on this station. Kill me, and you'll have every bounty hunter in the galaxy after you." Matt felt a surge of anger but held himself back. "Maybe, but that's a risk I'm willing to take." Before he could make his next move, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. Matt's grip tightened on his gun as a figure emerged from the shadows. To his shock, it was Jaya. "Jaya," he breathed, his surprise evident. She looked between him and Zorg, her expression unreadable. "Matt, don't do this. Killing him won't solve anything." Zorg smirked, clearly amused by the twist. "Listen to her, Reeves. She knows more about this world than you think." Matt's mind raced, struggling to understand why Jaya was here and what her connection to Zorg could be. But her pleading gaze cut through his confusion. "Matt, let him go," she said softly. "There's a lot you don't understand." With a frustrated sigh, Matt slowly lowered his gun. Zorg wasted no time, scrambling to his feet and backing away, his eyes never leaving Matt's. "You'll regret this, Reeves," he spat before disappearing into the shadows. Matt turned to Jaya, a mixture of anger and betrayal in his eyes. "Why, Jaya? Why did you stop me?" Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment he saw a hint of the burden she carried. Because Matt, Zorg isn't just another arms dealer. He's part of something much bigger, something that involves me. A chill ran down Matt's spine as he realized just how much he didn't know about her. "What are you involved in, Jaya?" She looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "If I told you, you'd be in danger. Just trust me, Matt. This goes deeper than either of us." In that moment, standing in the shadows of Nexus Station, Matt felt his world tilt. He was no longer just a bounty hunter chasing a target. He was entangled in something far more dangerous, and Jaya was at the heart of it. Unveiling shadows. The air in Nexus Station's lower levels felt heavier as Matt and Jaya stood in the aftermath of Zorg's escape. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions, each of them carefully considering the other. Matt's pulse still raced from the encounter, but now it wasn't just from the threat of Zorg. It was Jaya, her presence raising a torrent of emotions he hadn't expected. Jaya's gaze dropped to the ground, and she ran a hand over her hair, her shoulders tense. "Matt, I know you're angry. You probably don't understand why I let him go." "You're right. I don't," Matt replied, the frustration clear in his voice. "I had him. After months of tracking him across half the galaxy, I had him, and you." He stopped himself, exhaling sharply, forcing himself to keep his anger in check. "You said it was bigger than him, than us. But I need more than that, Jaya. I need to know why you stopped me." For a moment, her eyes softened. She took a step toward him, then hesitated, glancing around at the cold, metal walls of the station. "This isn't the place to talk about it," she said. "But if you want the truth, meet me at my apartment tonight. I owe you that much." With a nod, Matt watched as she disappeared down a dimly lit corridor. He felt the weight of her words pressing down on him, a sense of urgency that was impossible to ignore. Something about her had drawn him in from the beginning, but now he was caught in a mystery that was more dangerous than he'd realized. That night, he returned to Jaya's apartment, his mind racing with questions. When she opened the door, her expression was guarded, but her eyes betrayed a hint of vulnerability. She gestured for him to come inside, and he took a seat on the small sofa, facing her as she closed the door. For a long moment, they sat in silence. Finally, Jaya spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I'm about to tell you, it's something I've never told anyone here, but you need to understand why I stopped you tonight." Matt nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I wasn't always a bartender on Nexus Station," she began. "I come from a planet called Lana. It's a beautiful place, but restrictive. Our lives are mapped out for us from birth. Our roles, our partners, everything. For a long time, I lived by those rules, did what was expected of me. But one day, I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted freedom, a life of my own." Matt listened intently, sensing the pain behind her words. "So you left?" She nodded. "I ran. I thought I could disappear, start over somewhere no one would find me. That's when I ended up on Nexus. But freedom came at a cost. I didn't know anyone here, didn't have a place to go. I found work as a bartender, tried to keep my head down, but my past caught up with me." "Zorg," Matt said, piecing it together. Jaya's expression darkened. "He's not just an arms dealer. On Lana, he's known as the Keeper. He deals in information, secrets, and leverage. When I arrived on Nexus, he found out who I was, what I left behind, and he used it to keep me under his thumb. If I step out of line, if I refuse to help him when he needs it." She trailed off, her eyes filled with a fear that Matt had never seen before. Matt clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "And that's why you stopped me, because if I killed him, his network would have come after you." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's not just about me. I have family back on Lana. If Zorg dies, they'll pay the price." He made that very clear. Matt's mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. Everything about this mission, This chase for Zorg had suddenly shifted. It wasn't just about a bounty anymore. It was about something far more personal. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" he asked, his voice softer now. Jaya shook her head. "Because I didn't want to drag you into my mess. But when I saw you tonight, so determined, so close to killing him, I couldn't let it happen. Not like that." A silence fell between them, filled with the weight of everything she had just revealed. Matt felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him, but he knew that this was more complicated than he had realized. "So what's your plan then?" he asked. "You can't keep living under his control forever." She looked at him, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I don't intend to, but if I'm going to break free, I need leverage, something that will make Zorg let me go without risking my family. I've been looking for a way out ever since I got here." Matt nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "You know, you're not alone in this. I've been after Zorg for a long time, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that he has weaknesses. Every powerful figure does." Jaya's gaze met his, a glimmer of hope sparking in her eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we hit him where it hurts," Matt replied, a fierce determination in his voice. "If we can find out what he's hiding, get some real dirt on him, we can use it as leverage, enough to make him back off for good." Jaya's expression softened, a mixture of relief and gratitude on her face. "You'd help me, even after everything." Matt shrugged, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Let's just say I have a knack for getting into trouble. And besides, I have a feeling this isn't just about Zorg anymore." She looked at him, a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Thank you, Matt. Really." The plan took shape over the next hour as they strategized together, piecing together everything they knew about Zorg's operations on Nexus Station. Matt's years of hunting bounties and gathering intelligence proved invaluable as they mapped out potential weaknesses in Zorg's network. Finally, Jaya leaned back, a look of resolve on her face. "There's a shipment arriving tomorrow night. Zorg's people are bringing in something valuable, something they don't want anyone to know about. If we can intercept it, we might just find what we need." Matt nodded, feeling the thrill of the hunt coursing through him. "Then we'll be ready." The next night, they made their way to the docking bay where Zorg's shipment was scheduled to arrive. The tension between them was electric, each of them focused, determined. Matt's hand hovered over his pistol as they crept through the shadows, their footsteps silent against the metal floor. They waited in a dark alcove, watching as a group of Zorg's men unloaded a set of heavily guarded crates. Jaya's hand tightened around his arm, her gaze fixed on the scene below. "Now," she whispered, and they moved as one, slipping through the shadows toward the cargo. With calculated precision, they incapacitated the guards, moving swiftly to avoid detection. When they reached the crates, Matt pried one open, revealing a series of data chips, each labeled with intricate codes. Jaya's eyes widened as she read the labels. These are classified Lanan documents. If Zorg has these, he's been blackmailing officials from my planet." Matt's jaw tightened. "That's it then. This is the leverage we need." But before they could grab the data chips, a blaring alarm pierced the silence, red lights flashing as security systems engaged. Matt's heart pounded as he looked at Jaya. "We have to go, now." They sprinted down the corridors, guards hot on their trail. Shots rang out, and Matt pulled Jaya close, shielding her as they ducked into a side passage. Their breaths were heavy, their movements frantic as they dodged security patrols. Finally, they reached a safe point, hiding behind a stack of crates. Matt looked at her, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "We got what we came for. Now we can end this." Jaya nodded, her expression fierce. "Thank you, Matt. I don't know how to repay you." He shook his head, a small smile crossing his lips. "Just stay alive. That's all I need." As they slipped back into the depths of Nexus Station, Matt felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just a bounty anymore. It was personal. Together, they would bring Zorg down and end his grip on Jaya's life. and maybe, in the process, find a future neither of them had dared to hope for. A gamble with fate. The lights of Nexus Station flickered as Matt and Jaya slipped back into the safety of her apartment, clutching the data chips they'd stolen from Zorg's shipment. They were drenched in sweat, breathing heavily from their harrowing escape. Matt could feel the weight of their prize, a collection of secrets that could tear apart Zorg's empire and free Jaya from his grasp. But he also knew that they'd just crossed a line, one that Zorg would never forgive. Jaya placed the chips on the table, staring at them as though they held the power of her entire future. This is it, she whispered, almost to herself. If these chips contain what I think they do, we'll have enough evidence to expose Zorg's entire operation. Matt nodded, a steely determination settling in his chest. If he's been blackmailing Lanarn officials, then he's not just some arms dealer. He's a threat to entire planets. This is bigger than we thought. Jaya's fingers traced the edges of one of the chips, her gaze distant. It's not just officials he controls, she murmured. On Lanarn, the hierarchy is strict, unyielding. If anyone defies their role or betrays the system, it's a death sentence. I couldn't live like that, and I had to leave, but I never thought my family would pay for it. That's why I have to end this. I can't let Zorg hold this power over us any longer. The pain in her voice was raw, cutting through Matt's usual resolve. He'd seen people broken by fear and oppression, but something about Jaya's story made his protective instincts surge. He wanted to help her, not just because she needed it, but because he felt an unexpected pull toward her, something that went deeper than mere attraction. "What's our next move?" he asked, his voice steady. She looked up, determination hardening her gaze. "We need to get these chips decoded and get this information into the right hands. There's someone on Nexus, a tech expert who's worked with off-grid operatives before. His name's Ran, and he owes me a favor." Matt raised an eyebrow. "A tech expert who owes you a favor? You've been busy." Jaya gave him a small, rueful smile. "Survival requires connections. Nexus isn't a place you survive in alone." "Fair enough," Matt said, admiring her resourcefulness. "Then let's find this Ran." The tech district of Nexus Station was a labyrinth of narrow alleyways, each one filled with stalls and shops selling black market tech and unregistered upgrades. The air was thick with the scent of burning circuits and the hum of machinery, a place where legality was a mere suggestion. Ran's shop was tucked away in the back corner of a dimly lit corridor, the sign barely visible through the haze of neon lights. As they stepped inside, a tall, wiry figure glanced up from behind a desk cluttered with cables, processors, and holographic schematics. "Jaya," he greeted her, his voice a blend of relief and suspicion. "You're still alive. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again." "Ran," Jaya replied, offering him a nod. "I need your help. It's urgent." Ran's gaze shifted to Matt, who stood beside her, arms crossed, his presence commanding even in the cramped space. "And who's the friend?" "A bounty hunter with a grudge against Zorg," Jaya said simply. "We need these data chips decrypted. Can you do it?" Ran studied her for a moment, then the data chips, a low whistle escaping him. "You have no idea what you're sitting on, do you?" "Try us," Matt said, his voice laced with impatience. Ran motioned for them to follow him to the back of the shop, where a secure terminal sat hidden behind layers of shielding. He inserted one of the chips and began the decryption process, his fingers dancing over the keys with practiced speed. As the first files began to unravel on the screen, Ran's expression turned grim. Zorg isn't just blackmailing officials. He's manipulating entire trade routes, controlling shipments between planets, and supplying weapons to rebel groups while secretly funding their enemies. He's playing both sides, profiting from every conflict he fuels. Matt's jaw clenched. So he's got his hands in every war and negotiation across multiple systems. Jaya's face was pale as she took in the scope of Zorg's reach. This isn't just about Lana anymore. If this information gets out, Zorg's empire could collapse. But that's the problem, Ran said, his voice heavy with caution. If you release this, Zorg will know it came from these chips. He'll trace it back to you, Jaya, and he won't just come after you. He'll come after everyone connected to you. A chill settled over the room as the weight of his words sank in. Releasing the information would bring freedom, but at a steep cost. Matt took a step forward, his expression hard. Then we find a way to release it without making it traceable. There has to be a way. Ran shook his head. This is Zorg we're talking about. He's paranoid to a fault. Every piece of data has tracking layers. If you want to destroy him without exposing yourselves, you'll need to do it from the inside. Otherwise, you're just putting a target on your backs. Jaya's gaze shifted to Matt, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. We can't back down now. If we don't do this, he'll just keep controlling more lives, destroying more families. Matt nodded, his resolve matching hers. Then we go inside. We find his core, the heart of his operation, and take him down from within. Ran's eyes widened in alarm. Are you both insane? Getting close to Zorg is one thing, but breaking into his headquarters, it's suicide. Maybe, Matt replied, his voice unwavering. But if that's what it takes, then so be it. After a tense silence, Ran sighed, clearly conflicted. All right, I can help you get in, but only because Jaya saved my neck once. But once you're in, you're on your own. Their plan took shape quickly. Ran provided them with forged identities, disguises that would allow them access to the secure sector where Zorg's headquarters was located. The next night, dressed in attire that would allow them to blend into the underbelly of Nexus, Matt and Jaya made their way to the heavily guarded sector, each step tightening the coil of tension between them. As they reached the checkpoint, Matt could feel his pulse racing. Jaya was beside him, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes betraying a storm of emotions. They shared a brief, reassuring glance before presenting their forged credentials. The guards scanned them, then nodded, waving them through. Inside, the corridors were stark and cold, a brutal contrast to the bustling chaos outside. This was the core of Zorg's empire, a place where deals were made, alliances forged, and lives bought and sold. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows as they made their way to the data center, a high-security room where Zorg's most sensitive information was stored. The door was reinforced, but Ran had provided them with a passcode that bypassed the initial lock. They slipped inside, the soft glow of holographic screens illuminating rows of servers, each one pulsing with the lifeblood of Zorg's operation. All right, Matt whispered, his gaze scanning the room. Let's get what we came for. Jaya nodded, slipping a small device from her pocket. She attached it to one of the main servers, initiating a transfer of all the encrypted files to a secure location. As the files began to download, the tension in the room grew palpable. But just as the transfer neared completion, a warning light flashed on the server panel. Jaya's eyes widened. We triggered an alarm. We need to move, now. Matt grabbed her hand, and they bolted toward the exit, the sound of guards approaching echoing through the corridor. They sprinted down a series of passageways, dodging security patrols and ducking into side passages. The station was a maze, but Jaya led them through with a precision that surprised even Matt. Finally, they reached a service hatch that led to the lower maintenance levels. They scrambled inside, sealing the hatch behind them. The air was thick with the smell of grease and machinery, but it was safe, at least for the moment. They leaned against the wall, catching their breath, their hearts pounding in unison. That was too close, Matt muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Jaya looked at him, a glimmer of relief and triumph in her eyes. But we did it. We have everything we need. They shared a brief, intense look, the weight of their victory sinking in. It wasn't over yet, but they'd taken a massive step toward freeing Jaya from Zorg's control and dismantling his empire. But as they prepared to move, Jaya's expression shifted, a shadow crossing her face. Matt, there's something I need to tell you, something I haven't been honest about. He frowned, surprised by the sudden change in her tone. "What is it?" She took a shaky breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. "This plan, everything we just did, it was my only chance to escape. I needed to take down Zorg, but I also needed to get off this station, forever." Matt's chest tightened. "You're leaving?" She nodded, her eyes filled with a sorrow that cut deeper than words. "It's the only way to keep my family safe. Once this information is out, they'll come after me. Staying here, even with you, it's not safe." A silence fell between them, a chasm that suddenly felt impossible to bridge. Matt's hands clenched, a mixture of anger and sadness washing over him. He'd known her for only a short time, but in that time, she'd become more than just an ally. "Jaya, there's another way. We could face them together." She gave him a sad smile, her eyes glistening. "Matt, you're the strongest person I know, but this is my fight. You helped me get this far, and for that, I'll always be grateful, but I have to finish this on my own." He stared at her, his heart heavy. Part of him wanted to argue, to convince her to stay, but he saw the resolve in her gaze, the same strength that had driven her to leave Lana in the first place. She was a fighter, and this was her path. Finally, he nodded, his voice soft. "Then go, but remember, if you ever need me, I'll be here." Jaya reached up, placing a gentle hand on his cheek, a tender farewell that spoke more than words could. "Thank you, Matt, for everything." With one last, lingering look, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Matt alone in the dim corridors of Nexus Station, her absence a sharp ache in his chest. And as the station's lights flickered around him, he knew that his world would never be quite the same again. Shadows of sacrifice. Matt lingered in the dimly lit maintenance corridor long after Jaya had vanished into the shadows, his heart heavy with a feeling he hadn't known in years. Nexus Station's neon glow seemed harsher, colder somehow, as if mocking the sudden emptiness left by her departure. He'd been prepared for almost any outcome in his pursuit of Zorg, but losing Jaya hadn't been one of them. As the hours wore on, he couldn't shake the image of her determined face, the courage that had driven her to take on an empire. She was a warrior, someone who'd sacrificed everything to protect those she loved. And now, he had to honor that sacrifice by making sure her efforts didn't go to waste. He knew what he needed to do next. With renewed purpose, Matt made his way back through Nexus, navigating its maze-like corridors with the ease of someone who had spent far too long in its shadows. He needed a secure place to upload the data they had stolen from Zorg's database, a place where the information could be spread across the galaxy before Zorg's reach could silence it. As he approached the back alleys of the tech district, he remembered a contact he used once before, a hacker known as Kez who specialized in smuggling information across star systems. If anyone could help him, it was Kez. The hideout was concealed in an abandoned sector of Nexus Station, barely illuminated by flickering lights that buzzed ominously. Matt knocked on the rusted door in a sequence Kez had taught him, hoping the hacker hadn't disappeared in the months since they'd last spoken. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a thin, wiry man with wild, dark eyes and a tangle of wires draped around his neck. "Reeves." Kez's eyes widened in surprise. "Haven't seen you in a while. Last I heard, you were hunting that psychopath Zorg. Didn't expect you'd still be alive." Matt smirked. "Turns out I'm harder to kill than he thought. But I didn't come here to chat, Kez. I need your help." Kez raised an eyebrow, curiosity and caution flickering in his gaze. "Go on." Matt produced the stolen data chips from his jacket, watching as Kez's eyes lit up at the sight of them. This is Zorg's entire empire. Trade routes, blackmail schemes, bribes to officials. Enough dirt to bury him, and anyone who's ever worked with him. But I need it sent out everywhere, to every major system. Can you do it? Kez's face twisted into a mix of fear and excitement. Zorg's got eyes everywhere, you know. If he finds out I helped spread this, let's just say I'd rather not be on his radar. Matt leaned forward, his voice low and insistent. This isn't just about you, Kez. If we don't expose him, he'll keep destroying lives, keep blackmailing entire planets. You want to keep hiding in this hole forever, waiting for him to come after you. Kes's gaze shifted to the data chips, his fingers twitching. Finally, he let out a resigned sigh. Fine, but it'll cost you. Matt smirked, tossing him a credit chip loaded with enough to cover any favors he might need. Just make sure it's done right. Kes nodded, already lost in the maze of holographic screens, as he began the decryption and upload process. Lines of code flickered across his screen, the data flowing through secure channels that would blast Zorg's secrets across the galaxy. As the upload completed, Matt felt a surge of grim satisfaction. With this, he'd honored Jaya's sacrifice and finally put an end to Zorg's shadow over her life. Hours later, news of Zorg's empire unraveling began to ripple across Nexus Station. Whispers spread like wildfire, rumors of corrupt officials exposed, trade routes seized, and bribes unveiled. Matt could feel the energy shift around him as he walked through the station's corridors, the usual air of indifference replaced by tension and hushed conversations. He knew that Zorg's allies, his network of informants and enforcers, would soon start turning on each other in a desperate bid for survival. But he also knew that this was far from over. As Matt prepared to leave Nexus Station, his comlink buzzed with an encrypted message. He frowned, recognizing the code as one used by Jaya's contact, Ran. He opened the message, his heart skipping a beat as he read. Zorg's hunting Jaya. He knows about the data leak. She's cornered near the outer docks. Thought you'd want to know. Matt's stomach dropped. He'd been so focused on exposing Zorg that he hadn't anticipated how quickly the arms dealer would move to retaliate. Without a second thought, he broke into a sprint, navigating the winding corridors toward the outer docks. He could only hope he wasn't too late. When he reached the docks, the scene was pure chaos. Matt saw guards loyal to Zorg scanning the area, weapons drawn, their faces tense. In the distance, he spotted Jaya, ducked behind a stack of cargo crates, her figure barely visible in the dim light. She was trapped, surrounded on all sides with no clear escape. His hand tightened around his pistol as he assessed the situation. He knew he couldn't take on all of Zorg's men alone, not without backup or a better plan, but he couldn't just leave Jaya to fend for herself either. Steeling himself, he moved forward, slipping into the shadows and edging closer to her position. Just as he reached the edge of the crate stack, one of Zorg's men spotted him. The guard raised his blaster, but Matt was faster. He fired a precise shot, the guard crumpling to the ground before he could sound an alarm. The sound drew the attention of a few more guards, who began to close in on Matt's position. Jaya's head whipped around, her eyes widening as she spotted him. "Matt," she mouthed, shock and relief flickering across her face. He nodded, motioning for her to stay low as he fired at another guard who was closing in on their position. "I'm not letting you face this alone," he called out, his voice laced with a fierce determination. Jaya's eyes softened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she drew her own weapon, her hands steady as she prepared to fight her way out. Together, they moved in sync, each covering the other as they took down the guards one by one, a deadly dance in the shadows. The battle was brutal, their enemies relentless. But Matt and Jaya fought with a desperation born from shared purpose and a fierce loyalty that defied logic. As they took down the last of Zorg's men, a moment of silence settled over the docks, broken only by their heavy breathing. But just as they thought it was over, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, imposing man with cold, calculating eyes. Zorg. He clapped slowly, a mocking smile on his face. Well, I didn't expect my little bartender to put up such a fight. And you, Reeves, you were always more trouble than you were worth." Matt's grip on his pistol tightened. "It's over, Zorg. Your empire is finished." Zorg's smile twisted into a sneer. "Finished? You think a few data leaks can bring me down? I'm not some petty criminal, Reeves. I have power you can't even begin to understand." Jaya stepped forward, her eyes blazing. Your power is built on lies and manipulation. We've exposed you. People will see you for what you are." Zorg laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the empty docks. "Exposed, perhaps, but I've survived worse, and now I'll deal with you personally." With a sudden vicious movement, Zorg drew a weapon from his belt, aiming it at Jaya. Matt reacted instantly, stepping in front of her as a shield, but Zorg was faster than he'd anticipated. The blast struck Matt's shoulder, sending a searing pain through his body. Jaya screamed, catching Matt as he staggered. But Matt wasn't done. Summoning every ounce of strength, he raised his pistol, firing a shot that struck Zorg square in the chest. The arms dealer's expression shifted from smug confidence to shock as he stumbled backward, blood staining his clothes. He collapsed to the ground, his power and arrogance extinguished in an instant. Matt sank to his knees, the pain in his shoulder intensifying. Jaya was by his side in a heartbeat, her hands pressing against his wound as she tried to stem the bleeding. "Matt, you didn't have to." Her voice broke, tears filling her eyes. He gave her a weak smile, wincing at the pain. "I told you, I wouldn't let you face this alone." As she worked to tend to his wound, he felt the weight of exhaustion settle over him. But there was also a profound sense of relief, knowing that Zorg was finally gone, his empire dismantled. Jaya was safe, free from the chains that had bound her for so long. When she finished bandaging his shoulder, she looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow in her gaze. "I don't know how to thank you, Matt. You risked everything for me." He reached up, his hand resting on her cheek. "You're worth it, Jaya, more than you know." They sat in silence, the weight of everything that had happened settling over them. Nexus Station's lights flickered in the distance, but for the first time, Matt felt a glimmer of peace. And as they sat there, side by side in the aftermath of their victory, he knew that, whatever came next, he would always carry this moment with him, a memory of courage, sacrifice, and the bonds forged in the darkest of places.